Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Hamid Elamir. I am the host of Podcast with Dr. E. At this podcast, I sit with the world's experts in health, education, and community development to talk about current health challenges and ask them to share their experience, knowledge, and insight with all nations across the world so that we can learn from experts across the globe. Today, we will be discussing a very important topic that is a challenge in the healthcare industry. I have Dr. Irene Cop on the show to discuss about the topic. Welcome, Dr. Irene.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Hamid.
Dr. Irene Cop, MD, DC and founder and CEO of the Flameout Project, helps people heal themselves so they can shift from being a victim of their life to living a life full of freedom and fun. After her own flameout led to a catastrophic car accident, Dr. Irene is passionate about guiding other flameout individuals in transforming their lives and well-being. With over 25 years experience, she teaches her clients the powerful tools and practical skills they need in order to recuperate, rejuvenate, and reinvent their lives. With a comprehensive background as a medical doctor of chiropractic, Dr. Irene also has extensive training in acupuncture, traumatic brain injury, neurology, elite performance psychology, and stress management. She is a neurophysiological meditation instructor and contributing author for Insight Timer, a published co-author of 2 Nutrigenomics research articles in peer-reviewed journals. She is also a lead author for international publications. She has helped thousands of people heal themselves and reinvent their lives, including professional singers, musicians, dancers, athletes, other doctors, and top coaches, as well as everyday people. You can be a superhero of your own life, and Dr. Irene can show you how. Today's topic, as I just mentioned, is a very important topic in the health industry, and that is burnout. Especially during this pandemic time, this topic is really important to be addressed, and together we can find solutions for this. I'm going to read a couple statistics recently published by CDC. Almost 1.7 million deaths in the US in 2018, according to CDC, were caused in large by 1.2 million have died globally due to COVID. This is the recent research based on CDC, Johns Hopkins University. Also from the same source, 3.5 trillion is spent on treatment for chronic physical and mental conditions, according to the CDC. I mentioned briefly also in Dr. Irene's bio, but let's hear more from herself. So, Dr. Irene, why do you do what you do? In other words, what's your why?
I love that question, Dr. Hamid. We always say our mess is our message. And 2003, it seems like yesterday to me, but it's hard to believe it was like 17 years ago. I thought I was on top of the world. I thought I had it all together. I was a single mom. I had my practice. I was the perfect mom. Like when I had my young sons, I was the head of the PTA. I would bake cookies and do crafts with them. In other words, I was just super mom. And then when I didn't have them, I was workaholic, working like 12-hour days and shoving all of my workspace into as many few hours as I could. And I hit the wall. On Mother's Day weekend in 2013, I was driving north, and I live in Canada, folks. So when I say north, I mean north. And I was driving to visit a friend for the weekend, and I lost consciousness, and the road curved, and I kept driving straight into a massive rock face. I literally hit the wall. And in that car accident, my 2 young sons were with me, and my youngest son suffered a catastrophic brain injury and had to be airlifted out to Sick Children's Hospital in Toronto, which is like our preeminent pediatrics hospital in Canada. My 6-year-old son had suffered PTSD from witnessing adults were throwing up at the scene, if that gives you an idea of what it was like. And I broke 10 bones. This all happened during the first SARS epidemic. So I was in hospital on SARS quarantine in one hospital. My youngest son was in a different hospital. My other son was at home with the family, and I couldn't see them. I couldn't talk to them, couldn't have visitors. It truly was the lowest point of my life. I was literally spiraling down in guilt and shame. Like, what kind of doctor was I not to know? What kind of mother was I? And then, of course, the self-pity. I couldn't see anyone. I'll throw in the pain, from 10 broken bones, including both sides of my pelvis. So I had to lay flat on my back the whole time. It was the lowest point in my life. At one point, it was like, is life even worth living? What I realized is that I had to decide whether I was going to continue spiraling down and just give up, or I was going to fight. And I was going to fight for my children, knowing they still needed me, then more than ever, really, to help them heal, and that the world needed me. What I meant was, we as doctors, that burnout, yeah, it's a thing. And we're taught the consequences of it and what it means. But really, until you are in that and you are living it, it doesn't hit home, and it's not brought home like really deep down inside. And it changed my life to know that I wasn't a horrible doctor. I wasn't a horrible mother. I had been doing the best I could, thinking that I was the best for my kids, my patients, everybody. The issue is that burnout is a silent pandemic, given that it's global. If anything, encouraged by our culture. We're taught that we have to succeed and live that life. We're all chasing the golden life, and we're taught to work harder and harder and harder, and there's a stigma to burnout. Oh, so you're tired, are you? You're exhausted, you're weak, you're a failure. You obviously, and this is very much within the medical and healthcare fields, you don't have what it takes. So I realized at that point that I had a role to play, that I could bring awareness to this massive global pandemic and demystify it and take the stigma away from it. Because not only is it wreaking havoc on us personally and on our health and well-being, it's also, as you mentioned in those stats that you just read, that more people die every single year in the United States from chronic conditions that are either caused by or greatly aggravated by chronic stress than have died worldwide from COVID. It's not to downplay COVID. It is to really highlight the massive effects and impact that chronic stress has on us. And then you mentioned 3.5 trillion, I believe you said, dollars just in the United States alone are spent in managing these chronic conditions. In other words, it's a huge drain on the healthcare system, and we can't keep going like this. All the experts are saying that. So something needs to give for us personally and healthcare system.
The story you said was really powerful. Two keywords you mentioned there. One was the sense of failure when you talk about burnout among healthcare professionals and the stigma behind it, which is very important to be addressed. Your story, first of all, is very inspiring story, although it's painful, but how you change that challenge into an opportunity, not only to raise yourself and be a successful instructor and person who can teach others about it and other healthcare practitioners. It is the stigma which a lot of healthcare practitioners are not even talking about, the burnout, all the consequences behind that. Before we go deeper into that, I wanted you to tell us, what is burnout?
It's a great question, Dr. Hamid, because it has changed. Burnout has traditionally been what we call the whole constellation of what could happen with chronic stress. Recently, burnout has been recognized in the healthcare field. We call it the ICD-10, the diagnostic codes. It was never recognized as a condition before. If it's not written down as a diagnosis, then it doesn't exist, basically. However, the World Health Organization took a very, and I'll say respectfully, narrow view of what burnout is. So the World Health Organization defines burnout, number one, as a workplace related condition, only in terms of mental and emotional effects. So they talk about, feeling exhausted. Depersonalization is the fancy word of saying that you disengage from work. You may feel cynical. You're perhaps not as effective at your job. So that's how the World Health Organization defines burnout, which is truly not enough to explain the whole picture. Because chronic stress, and it's been known for over 80 years, there are very physical effects from chronic stress. So it, as a result of the hormones like your stress hormone, your cortisol level being increased during stress, your adrenal glands get exhausted. That's a fancy way of saying that your immune system is compromised, which means that you're actually at greater risk for things like viral infections like COVID. You're at greater risk for cancer. It increases your heart rate, increases your blood pressure, makes you more at risk for heart disease and cardiovascular disease. It messes with your blood sugar and your insulin levels, which leads to diabetes, which then can lead to all the complications of diabetes, including Alzheimer's, including heart disease, including neuropathies. So in other words, there are very, very physical effects. The cortisol hormone itself makes you gain weight. The increased weight through what that everybody is complaining about, COVID-15, whatever it is, right? It's not just because you're eating more cookies. You may be going for comfort food, comfort drinks. The reality is you could be eating perfectly well, and the cortisol hormone is going to make you hold on to the weight because it views that you could be in danger of starving. So it's going into that mode where it needs to protect you. So it makes you gain weight.
Let me ask you that you put it in a good way, the definition of WHO, and that's somehow limited to physical and emotional, the definition of burnout. They also call it, it's not a disease, it's occupational phenomenon. At least that is recognized. And it's good to talk about it, especially when it comes from healthcare practitioners. Let me ask about the term flameout. What is it, and how would you define flameout as opposed to burnout?
When I saw the definition that the World Health Organization attached to burnout, I knew that two things were needed. Number one, we needed a different term that encompasses the whole picture of what can happen. And yes, they are diseases. And number two, to move away from the stigma, because it's an unfortunate fact right now that mental illness of any kind carries a stigma in our society. Burnout, because it has been associated with mental and emotional effects, falls under that stigma. So my purpose by highlighting the physical impacts and diseases that can happen is to take away that stigma. It's to bring it into the general acceptance of this is a thing. So when I was looking at what term would work, I cannot take full credit for learning about the term flameout. My friend and mentor, Dr. Richard Earle, who is the head of the Canadian Institute for Stress and the Hans Selye Foundation, who is considered the father of the modern stress theory, documented all of those physical effects in his research. Richard and I had a conversation once, and he mentioned the term flameout. Now, he mentioned it in terms of, he looked at it as a milder version of burnout.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing is, flameout in aviation terms, it has to do with airplanes. And what it is the unintended loss of engine power. And that can be one engine, it can be all of your engines, and it could be due to running out of fuel. It could be having the engine's flame doused, like torrents of rain, for instance, or perhaps there's a block in the fuel line. So this is how it's termed in aviation. So yes, theoretically, it could be more mild if you think about it. Say one engine goes out and the plane is still able to limp along and fly to its destination. However, if all four of your engines go out at once, you can crash and burn. So I decided that Flameout was actually a far better analogy of what is happening, so that it encompasses, yes, the mental, the emotional, and the physical. And it can include the traditional burnout, like you've run out of fuel, or perhaps your energy, your fire has been doused. And by that, it could just be like overwhelmed by life. And it doesn't have to be just workplace. COVID is a perfect example of that. Or perhaps your wife gets breast cancer, or you have an elderly, like a parent that you all of a sudden need to look after and be a caregiver for, in addition to working. Or as with COVID, now people are working from home, they're perhaps homeschooling their children. In other words, everything is just being piled on them. Or it can also be a blockage in the lines. And that may be because of other things getting in the way. Say you fall down and break a leg. Otherwise, perhaps the energy is fine, but it's like you're out for the count because of something else. And I use the term syndrome to mean that a syndrome is, again, just a fancy way of saying that there's multiple aspects to it. And so Flameout syndrome is the term that I came up with to really define the whole picture and impact of chronic stress, that you can literally crash and burn, as I did.
Thank you. I like that. It definitely encompasses way more than just physical and emotional aspects of burnout. So during this pandemic time, everything is challenging, especially in the healthcare industry and healthcare providers being in the front line of fighting against this coronavirus, not to mention the general public as well, experiencing something which is not easy to cope with. And this is challenging time for a lot of people in terms of socioeconomic challenges and health issues, and working from home is another challenge. So with all these challenges, and of course chronic stress is adding to it, what is the effect of chronic stress on people's life, especially during this pandemic?
That's a great question, Dr. Hamid. We were already in a silent pandemic of chronic stress and flameout without even knowing it. We just called it by different names: heart disease, cancer, pneumonia, diabetes, increased allergies, increased autoimmune conditions. And COVID has really put it over the top. So we went from the acute stage of everybody being in fear, right, and not knowing what was going to happen, and afraid that they were going to get COVID, that their family members were going to get COVID, that their patients, clients, what was going to happen to their jobs as all the economies shut down. And then we moved into the next few months. In the beginning, your adrenaline is hyped. You're just like, okay, we're going to do this. And the adrenaline can only last so long. And then the cortisol has to carry you through the stress. And as I mentioned, that it messes with your sleep quality. You stop being able to think straight because the chronic stress is literally taking out your brain's executive functioning, your decision making, your logic, your creativity, your motivation to get things done, and even your emotional inhibition. And now we're at COVID exhaustion. People call it pandemic fatigue, COVID exhaustion. This is burnout. And I look at this as the canary in the mine. The canary in the mine, not that long ago, miners were put in working conditions that were horrible, especially for air quality. And is that they would have a canary that they would take down with them into the mine. And if the canary keeled over, they knew they had to get out right away. So the canary in the mine is the harbinger, the warning sign. You got to get out now. You're going to be the next one to keel over. How people are feeling right now, mentally and emotionally, the alarm should be going off. That if this is how it's impacting you mentally and emotionally, guaranteed it's impacting your body. And the COVID 15, 20, 25, 30 pounds that everyone is gaining is another sure sign that we are all feeling the impacts of the chronic stress of this year. And it's going to take a long time for that stress to be cleared, way longer than COVID. And that is why in the medical literature, they're saying that the next pandemic is going to be mental illness. And that is because of the mental and emotional impacts of all
Right.
the stress of what people have been going through with COVID.
I totally agree with that. Burnout in healthcare professionals, it's a stigma, a negative connotation attached to it, but we need to raise awareness, speak out about it, and inform so that we can find solutions for this. In 2014 and 15, 54% of doctors say they are burnout. 88% of doctors are moderately to severely stressed, and 59% of doctors wouldn't recommend a career in medicine to their children. So that is a huge challenge in there. We need to find solutions for this. We need to help healthcare practitioners, and someone like yourself, you have a very powerful story about it and why you're doing what you do. I also believe that health is not limited to just prescriptions, private practices, and hospitals. It has to start from every individual, and we have to look for all the underlying causes and root causes of health problems, because we need a systematic approach in order to tackle such issues. And for that, we're also putting a panel discussion, and I'm glad you're also part of the panel discussion. There, we will have a package of solutions from different walks of health to help other healthcare practitioners be happy, satisfied, and have that sense of accomplishment and fulfillment in their job in the healthcare that we all love to do. Why shouldn't we just be focusing on our own health as well? And thank you again so much, Dr. Irene, for the final words. Please share any information that the audience can learn more about you.
Awareness is 80% of the battle and the solution. Thank you for having me here and giving me the opportunity to highlight this flameout syndrome, because just becoming aware of it and knowing about it is 80% of the solution. And I'll be happy to come back and talk about other solutions as well. So I'm all about giving my clients practical, step-by-step, easy to implement tips and tools that they can use to heal themselves. You can reach me on Dr. Irene on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn.
Thank you again, Dr. Irene. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
And dear audience, for more topics about health and health issues, both in the health industry and in general public, please stay tuned with Dr. E podcast. Thank you all and have a good day.